All right, so let's talk about priming. Now, you kind of came to me with this idea that you wanted to talk about. I find it fascinating, and I find it very suitable for what it is that we do here at Sypher Training. But I kind of want you to lay out for the viewers what priming is and kind of how it can help people in motivating them into doing something, positive with their life or what have you.
So, just for context, it's one of those things for me where through our discussions here and then, even what I do at work, I always try to work in a lot of self-reflection. So with Sypher, for example, we've touched a lot on kind of the mental piece behind Sypher and motivation and vulnerability and all that stuff. And I go home at the end of my night after a tough workout, and I'm like, man, what could I have done to do that better? Like, I get stuck, and I get to where I feel like I've plateaued or whatever it is, and so I have to overcome my own mental challenges. And I found out that one of the things that I'm guilty of is kind of negative self-talk and conditioning myself to believe that I'm only capable of so much, especially because there was a period of time where I was on the turf in Royal Oak, and I was my fitness was a lot different back then, and I moved up in scores very quickly over time, and now that I am back at it, I'm in a different place in terms of fitness. It's taken more for me to recover what I had fitness-wise versus where I was, and that can get really discouraging for me.
Can I ask you really quickly? Yeah. You're saying essentially that it's harder for you to get to where you were.
Yeah.
Do you mean that physically, or do you mean that score-wise, or what have you?
I mean all of it. Like, okay. So the funny thing was that when I first started back here, I was in Flint for a little over a year. Had a series of circumstances happen in my life that led to me not working out at all, eating very poorly, over-focusing on my work, really letting that get to me. So I really let myself go. And so, over the course of a year and a half or so, I put on 50 pounds. I had no routine. I had poor self-image. And so me coming to Detroit was like a restart. Like, I'm going to get everything back on track. And I knew that Sypher had worked really well for me before, and that would be a great springboard for me to kind of reel everything else back in. So when I first started back here, I remember I started back on a 25-pound plate. Doing my first couple of workouts. I think I did newbie 1 and skipped newbie 2 because I'd done this before.
Okay. And
so my scores started out on that 25-pound weight class. Okay. And I hadn't done that weight class before. So, my first few scores were, in the 300s or whatever. And then when I moved up in weight class, it loaded all my scores from back when I was in Royal Oak.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh, shit. I used to be so much better at this, So, I was immediately hit with man, look at where I am now versus where I was when I left off last time.
Right.
And I immediately got discouraged.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's flip the thinking a little bit, and I don't know if this is an example of priming, but we can take your kind of experience specifically. One of these things that you probably wouldn't be aware of is that since you came the last time at Royal Oak, I can tweak the scores. I can tweak what used to be an 800 is now essentially a 725.
Okay.
So you've got about a 75-point difference that you probably weren't aware that I changed. It would have been the beginning of 2017.
Yeah.
So I think you were gone during that time. So that's one thing you got to kind of keep in the back of your mind is that, okay, maybe add 75 points to what I'm scoring now and kind of compare it to Royal Oak. The other thing I want to know is you said you had to lose, or you put on 50 pounds.
Yeah.
Did you come to Royal Oak with 50 pounds of extra weight that you wanted to lose?
So when I started at Royal Oak last time around, and this is before I was ever in Flint, I was already in decent shape. I had been playing soccer pretty regularly. I had done CrossFit off and on, so I was already okay. And Sypher kind of enhanced the level of fitness that I was already starting to kind of build on. So I was really able to kind of take off with that with Sypher last time. So I reeled in nutrition. I was consistent in coming to the turf. So I made quick progress and sustainable progress when I was in Royal Oak. So I wasn't starting from nearly the same place then as I am now.
And that's what I think is important to remember. So you kind of have like a double a double mountain that you're trying to climb, in that you came into your second phase or second kind of Syphus career, if you will, already at a disadvantage because one, you maybe were not in that, your baseline fitness level was not what it was when you came to Royal Oak, but also you have this standard that you already set for yourself with your first rendition of Syphus training, like, oh, I gotta, be at 600. I shouldn't feel as winded. Whereas really, you gotta kind of break that mentality and bring yourself to kind of day one, different body, different goal, different approach.
Yeah, well, and I think it fits really well with the conversation we had last time about shame, right? Like, you were able to just now rationalize why it is that my assessment of where I was and what I was doing before wasn't necessarily accurate because of tweaking the score and because of where I was in terms of my level of fitness starting out. Where when I looked at that score that was loaded from the last time I worked, that immediately put me in that shame-based place where I'm like, man, I suck at this, that I am or I suck mentality. So I built on that. So going back to kind of mentioning priming, essentially, I conditioned myself to expect that, right? No matter how well I was doing here, I kind of went in scared. I kept telling myself, you know that you're fat, and you know that you're slow, and you know that, you could do better, and this and that. So, I'm coming in with that mentality.
Right.
So, I like how you describe it, I already have that double mountain.
Yeah.
I have that I'm trying to work through before I even get going with the workout for the day. So I recently attended a training for work where a huge topic that was being discussed was this idea of priming, and we're already kind of aware of this self-talk thing, and you and I had mentioned that in our conversations where it's almost like you speak it into existence, right?
Yeah.
So and I had been doing that with this whole idea that I'm slow, I'm fat, I can't do this, and even with me being a therapist, I've tried to counter that with, I can do this. I will try to do better. I want my score to get better next time, and this and that. But what I learned about priming is that there's so much more to it than that, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have something that you want to kind of come back with before I really go into what priming is and isn't.
Yeah, I would say that one more thing that I would kind of add to that, if we're talking about your instance in coming to Syphus training the first time, is that I would say, I don't really know how you worked out in Royal Oak. I don't know what your form was like there, but I would imagine that through these conversations that we're having, you're probably a little bit more in tune with what it means to have form first mentality.
Yeah.
And it's very tough to compare scores. That's one of the negative or drawbacks with Syphus, is that if we keep track of everyone's career, I go back to 2014 and prior, but I have a full career, so I can go back and check my stats, and they're in the thousands, and now I'm scoring in the 600s regularly.
Yeah.
But that's because my mental approach has conditioned my physical self to actually act it out differently on the turf, and I hold myself to a different standard. Therefore, my 600 now is different than the 1,000 that I used to score then.
Yeah.
And I have to bring myself down to earth, or remind myself that, hey, you're comparing yourself to your old self and your old standard of form. Now you're carrying it out to a different degree and different level of pride and care in your movements. So you're not comparing apples to apples, even though it's the same sport.
Yeah. No, and I agree with most of that. I think, and the funny thing for me is that even in that kind of adjusted focus towards form rather than score necessarily, I think there was a part of me that came back to this, had that shock to my system about, wow, that's a low score that I'm getting coming back to this. I think at first I justified it as well, at least I have form, or I've done this before and I know some of these movements and I can really that can be where I shine. So I kind of gravitated towards that because I felt like that was where my accomplishment was at the time. I could really focus on that and polish that up and say, well, yeah, I got a 3 something, but man, did I do those, bucks really well or whatever it was. So yeah, that was my, and that kind of takes us back to this idea, that accomplishment is what drives us to
Yes.
kind of achieve more. For me, that was my accomplishment. But what I also kind of learned through that is that, I had gotten to the point where I was coming here regularly. I'm kind of back in that about 4-day-a-week schedule for now until I actually get in Detroit full time.
Right.
But what I learned was that routine that I was building for myself wasn't in itself necessarily enough to overcome this negative priming that I had done.
Okay.
This idea that I was still coming in with this like self-defeating talk or behavior that well, you're still fat, you still can't do this,
Right.
you still have so much further to go, and yeah. I was kind of talking about how even though I had kind of developed a routine for getting here, that it wasn't enough to really overcome my.
So here's the thoughts that were popping in my head right away, is that whether it's you or anybody, and whether it's Sypher or anything else, a lot of this negative talk comes from comparison. Whether it's, you compare your socioeconomic status to somebody else's, or your financial situation, the job that you have, the score that you have on the turf, the score that you used to have compared to what you have now. It's all a matter of comparison. And my hope is that through this conversation, by the end of it, the negative self-talk, I think we'll resolve that whole mentality just by working it out through, you explaining what priming is, how to use it, and how it's, used, I guess in your line of work and whatnot.
So the interesting thing about, one of the things that really hit me about this idea of priming is that so for example, with the kids or even adults that I work with, a lot of the conversation revolves around control, right? Like how much control you have over your life, and a lot of that having to do with like conscious decisions that you're making, right? So the funny thing is like your brain, for example. Your brain is the most complicated thing in the universe, right? There's not a supercomputer that even touches it, although they're saying that by like 2030 or so, we'll have developed a computer system that can equal the processing power of the human.
It's AI for you.
Yeah, I know, right? So right now, our brain processes anywhere from 1 trillion to like 100 trillion bits of information per second.
You can't even fathom that,
It's a lot. Again, there's nothing out there that even comes close. But of that 100 trillion bits of information, you're only aware of about 2,000 bits of it, right? So that's your conscious mind. And that goes to show like how much of your body function or awareness is handled in the unconscious or the subconscious, right? So you're not consciously commanding your body to do 99% of the tasks that it's doing, right? Like you're not telling your body to breathe.
Right.
You're not telling your feet to go one in front of the other when you walk. Like you're on autopilot for 90% of the things that you're doing, right? A lot of that subconscious function comes from priming. So some of it is somatic, which is of the body, right? So somatic. So for example, like when you learn to walk, it's a very arduous task when you first get started. Like you start with crawling and then you kind of stumble around a little bit, which essentially walking is it's like coordinated falling, right? You're putting one foot and you're falling forward and you just keep going with that and eventually you just walk and then you don't think of it anymore, right? So that's somatic priming.
Okay.
Somatic priming is when you use words or like your mental function to program your mind or body to do things. So. Yeah. So for example, it's really funny because if you tell yourself often enough, like, let's say you just, as cliche as this is, let's say you hate Mondays, right?
Okay.
You tell yourself all the time, I hate Mondays, it's gonna suck, it's gonna suck, it's gonna suck. Eventually, Mondays are going to suck for you, right? Because you've primed yourself or you've conditioned yourself to expect that on Mondays, right? Okay. So the research tells us, it used to be back in the day that it took like 3 weeks or 21 days to build a habit, right? Yeah. And that can be a somatic habit or a somatic habit. So if you tell yourself this enough or if you do it enough after a few weeks, the research now tells us about 90 days. So about 3 months to kind of build a habit for yourself. So
every single day, or how's that?
Yeah. So if you engage in a routine behavior or
thought,
consistently for 90 days, it becomes your reality. So, and that's the funny thing about language, which is super cool. Like all language is hypnotic.
Can you explain that? Because I mean, I read that too, and I was like, I kind of want to understand that whole sentence that was in there.
Yeah, so your language is a reflection of like your mental function, right? So like what's going on in your head, the best way for you to communicate that is either through nonverbal or verbal communication to somebody else, right?
Right.
So your presentation of what's going on in your head to somebody else, that's your reality.
Okay.
Right? Like you have no other way to communicate your reality to anyone except for what you express nonverbally or verbally.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and your behavior in that way conditions responses from your environment, whether it's a person or a thing or whatever it is, right? So it becomes this interaction over time that becomes like your awareness of your reality, right? And that sounds really like...
But how is it hypnotic? It's just the repetition of the same thought over and over again that produces a reaction or...
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like manipulative in a way. So
Okay.
like your communication of your awareness or your mental state or your function repeatedly over time conditions responses, right? So when you think about what hypnotizing is, like if I tell you enough that you're getting sleepy or you know your eyes are drooping or you're really relaxed right now, or picture yourself, you know, near a stream, like if my cadence and my repetition falls in that like optimal range, you're going to start like putting yourself there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's all about that whole perception is reality thing. So that's where the hypnotic part of it comes in.
Okay.
And that's best communicated through language or nonverbal, like paralanguage is what we call it.
Paralanguage.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
So paralanguage is like anything other than verbal language. So that's your nonverbal cues, nonverbal expression, body language.
Okay, so let's segue a little bit of that into Sypher. Like I find that as a pro or as a trainer in Sypher training, there are a lot of different ways to engage with the member in a more effective, positive way to pull out the best in the person who's doing the exercises. For me, it is nonverbal cues. Like 9 times out of 10, I'm not much of a cheerleader saying like, good job, way to go. That's just not how I am. But I can usually make eye contact with somebody and know whether or not they need help, or if they're stopped in the middle of the turf, I can just give them a look, and I feel like I can motivate them just by a look, whereas I don't know every trainer, but I would say most of them may have to say something. Is there any like evidence or, I guess, explanation to like when silent cues are more effective as opposed to verbal, or is it the other way around?
Well, so technically nonverbal, I mean, particularly in conversation, nonverbal accounts for about 70% of understanding. So that's why, you know, these days, especially in my field, there's such a shift towards like virtual interactions or like telephonic therapy or things like that. And that's like, there are two very opposing camps with that because, you know, the nature of our profession is human interaction. And what we know, again, is that 70% of human interaction depends on that nonverbal. So like whether that's tone, and it's one of those things where a common exercise is to take a sentence and emphasize different parts of that.
Yes.
Right? Harry, you didn't take the trash out.
Yeah.
Harry, you didn't take the trash out. Harry, you didn't take the trash out. You know, like you emphasize different parts of it and it completely shifts the meaning of what you're saying.
And that's why texting is so ambiguous nowadays.
Or email even. So like even pre-texting when email like etiquette was the big thing. It's like, I remember getting all caps messages from people that were still kind of figuring out email. I'm like, stop yelling at me, right? Like that's your first response, but some people don't understand how that comes across. So yeah, so the nonverbal accounts for a majority of it. Now, to get to where like, you know, you're describing an interaction where it sounds like you got to a point where you felt like that kind of communication was more effective than saying, hey, you might want to check this, or...
Well, it depends on who the person is.
And that's just it. Like everybody kind of communicates differently. So some people, you know, depending on how they function socially, are completely oblivious to nonverbal cues, right?
Yeah.
I can give somebody a look and go like, They're like, what? And then some folks like, I have, you know, depending on who I'm running with when I'm on the turf, some folks insist on being very verbal with me, and I'm not talking about pros, but I'm talking about other people that are running with me, and I'm like, dude, I don't want you to talk. Like, I don't, like, I appreciate it, but I don't respond to that.
Right.
You know? So,
Yeah.
because they don't get the nonverbals.
Right.
So you're right. I mean, it depends on the individual.
And I think I'm very much that way too. And I think a lot of times we will mirror the way that we want to be treated, essentially.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you can assess somebody's level of empathy on their ability to kind of interpret that. You know, because like it's really tough to mirror somebody if you're not an empathetic person.
Okay.
Because you become more oblivious to like how they're presenting or what they're trying to communicate to you.
Yeah.
So like I think the better your ability to connect with folks, the easier that comes to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's very, very true. That's 90% of the pro's job is understanding the individual that you're trying to assist. And that's why I feel like the people who give you the open invitation to correct them form-wise, that makes our job a lot easier because we know that like olive branch has been like given to us. Okay, now we can like not offend you in correcting your form.
Yeah, exactly.
And so one of the things like you kind of gave me here, there's a whole bunch of, instead of saying this, try saying this.
Right.
You know, like instead of giving the negative connotation, give it the positive vibe.
Yeah, so the whole idea with that is this idea called dominant thought.
Okay.
Right? So think about like you have a kid.
Right.
You know, Parenting 101 says that if your kid is engaging in a behavior that you don't want them to engage in, so like if there's like a hot stove is kind of a common example. You say, don't touch, right? That's hot, don't touch that. Or don't go there, or don't mess with that, or whatever it is. The idea of dominant thought is when you take all the modifiers out of what you're trying to say, what remains is a dominant thought. So if you tell me like, don't touch the oven, what I'm hearing is touch the oven.
Okay.
Right? So like you're still kind of communicating that expectation within that negative statement.
Okay.
So again, like when I work with families a lot with small kids and they're trying to recondition behavior, I always have them target an appropriate positive response, right? So instead of maybe don't touch that oven, I might be saying like, hey, let's have safe hands, or let's, you know, let's touch this instead, or, you know, stay close to dad or stay close to mom or whatever. So like you want to target an appropriate response that's positive.
Okay.
Instead of like focusing on the negative behavior. So like stop it, don't. I mean, I always discourage from that.
Yes.
And you know, the best way is to give the kids some positive alternatives. So an example, a personal example for me is, you know, I really struggle with being consistent with like my nutrition, and that's been a downfall of mine for quite a while. A really funny example that the facilitator of this training gave, and all of us accept because we didn't see it as feasible, is I shed pounds daily for no reason.
Well, yeah, I saw that too. Yeah.
And it's like, I just lost my mind when I read that. I'm like, how on earth is that, like, does that make any sense? So what happens is, theoretically, I've not tested this out on myself, but if I told myself that statement over and over again, and to be specific, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 times a day.
That's a lot.
A lot. It sounds like a lot, but the rate at which your mind.
So you play soccer and you have that. What is that repetitious thought?
Yeah. So when I first started back in soccer, this was, you know, after having gone, like I said, 1.5 years in Flint, not doing anything, gaining weight, being miserable. I started back here at Sypher about 1.5 months, started slowly building up confidence, right? When I first started back in soccer, I still had that narrative of, I'm fat, I'm slow, I run out of energy quickly, I can't last very long, I'm not good at this anymore, right? And so what I found that in my first few games, I would take myself out of the game 10, 15 minutes in, stand on the sideline, not be winded necessarily or anything. Like, you know, I would feel a little bit like worn out, but I would recover quickly. I'm like, why am I even out here? So over time, like I think it was a few games later, I had a decent game. And this was, you know, I continued going in Cyphus. I kind of built up some conditioning, some agility and whatnot, and I had a decent game. I was like, man, I mean, like that went better than I thought. Like, I can do this. And you know what? I know how to play this game. I've done it for years. And like, I'm a pretty good soccer player, and I'm pretty quick for my, you know, like, so that became like my new normal, starting like, I don't know, the beginning to middle of August, to where now, like, I've completely shifted the way that I mentally approach a game. So like, I was doing a summer league in Southfield, and now I do like a fall league in Livonia. And since I've started that league, like my performance has shifted completely because of what I'm telling myself I'm capable of.
Right.
So that, again, that thought is now, I'm pretty good at, or I'm good at this. I know how to play this game.
Right.
I'm good at this game. I can last the whole game. I'm fast. So
Now, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like those repetitious positive thoughts are exacerbated by having a positive action. So like, okay, I had a good game. Okay, so let's build on that. Let's build on that. For me, when I played baseball in college, if you went 3 for 4, you got to hit 3 out of the 4 times you were up to bat.
Right.
That is a contagious feeling, and you can usually build upon it. That's what you call a hitting streak, or you're feeling hot. But the opposite is true. That's negative thought. I went 0 for 4. I struck out 3 times, or something like that. I am not a consistent hitter. That kind of doubt. I think if you let doubt creep in and you doubt yourself, that's the pitfall that you run into.
And it's that whole idea, and I think this is performance based, no matter what it is that you're doing. But it's that whole idea that you're psyching yourself out. Like that's what that is. Like you have what starts out as like a random occurrence, whether it's positive or negative.
Right.
And you allow that to kind of inform your entire experience. Like what was that? Like I suck today. Like this is awful. Like and then that either becomes, you either build on that as your new normal, or you've got enough resilience going into it where you say like, that was a fluke, man. I'm better than this.
Right.
I'm good at this game. That was a one-off. Like this isn't me.
So for hockey and Sypher specifically, usually if I don't mentally prepare and do like imaging, that's not the right word, like visualization, that's what I'm looking for. Like the night prior, usually I can tell you how the workout or the game's going to unfold within the first like 2 minutes of warm-ups. Like you're talking about somatic priming, and what was the other one? Or somatic thought?
Somatic and somatic, yeah.
There's somatic and somatic?
Yeah.
That's what okay. I am often very present with, you're talking about walking, is like involuntary. For some reason or another, I think about the way that I walk when I'm walking. And if I feel like my hands and my feet are out of sync, that's where I'm like, all right, it's gonna be a rough workout. Okay. It's gonna be a rough day. So maybe I'm not kind of like the usual person where I'm present with like pretty much every movement and the way my body's feeling, or I overthink it. But I will immediately, if I'm like, this isn't going to be my day, immediately my thoughts are negative, and it's not going to be my day. It's not going to be my day, and the workout will reflect that thought.
Oh yeah.
Whereas the opposite's true. So unfortunately, sometimes it's like a flip of a coin if I haven't mentally prepared myself for, the day's workout.
Well, and I think that's where people I think that's where people go wrong, is like, you say it's like a flip of a coin kind of thing. Like people kind of assume that they don't have control over those situations, that things just happen to them in that way. And as hokey as it sounds to a lot of folks, like you have a lot more control than you think over how your mindset dictates what happens to you, or how you perceive the things that happen to you. Because at the end of the day, and this is something else I communicate to my clients a lot, like that's what you have control over. You don't have control over the things that happen to you. Your perception of those things and how you react to them, that's where all your control is.
How you react to them is huge in the form first mentality.
Yep.
Like today, and I'm sure people who are watching this can relate to this if they do Sypher, is you are, let's say you're leading the pack. You're ahead of everybody. You get to a certain exercise where it drains you, and the people are just nipping at your heels, and all of a sudden they surpass you.
Yeah.
It's tough, even if everyone's got good form, it's tough for you to not want to stay ahead. I think that's just like a primal instinct, like, I gotta stay ahead. But that's when I try to reel back in. Form first is the thing that I repeat to myself daily, I don't know, about 500 times, but I find myself saying form first, or thinking it so frequently that I feel like it has permeated into like my actions. But it's like, It's really hard for me to put into words, but I'll be like down on the ground doing whatever exercise it is, and I can feel the people either ahead of me, behind me, trying not to judge their form, trying to not compare myself to, you should stay ahead of these folks. It's like, no, wait, this is my workout. I shouldn't be comparing myself to the peripheral actions of others. I don't want to react to that, because then I'm in a reactive state. Therefore, I am not getting the most out of this moment.
Yeah.
I need to be proactive and be with myself. And that's hard to explain to other people, but that's when I stay within myself, then I feel my workout and whatever it is that I'm doing is more effective, and I get the response that I want.
Yeah, well, and that's just it, because like I have my days where it's like that, and then I have days like today where I kind of was relying on that competition piece more so than I usually would to kind of drive me, because, again, this is my negative talk, but I'm used to not really hanging close with a lot of other people. Like,
yeah.
Especially when I first was starting out back, like, you know, I might be able to hang for like the warm up or whatever, like I'd get some of the agility stuff, but I would very quickly fall behind once I started crawling and my weight started working against me, and then folks would start to pass, and I'd kind of give up. And I'm like, this is useless, you know, whatever. But, you know, I've built that up, and then today, like, I was kind of neck and neck with a couple people, like, throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more control I have over, like, the way that I'm doing things, the more I could allow those things in the way that I wanted them to be let in.
That's well said.
Instead of, like, having that negative framing of it where it's like, oh, shit, like, here they go, and this, I better hurry up, and whatever else. Like, I allowed that healthy competition in to the extent that I wanted it, and I could shut everything else out. So I wasn't necessarily focused, like, I was still very focused on my form and very focused on doing things correctly.
Yeah.
And I very just deliberately and purposefully let in that competition because I knew, I was able to assess, like, I knew that it would help me out in the moment.
Right.
So
I mean, you accepted it, you allowed it to come in, and that's, I think, a key and crucial point of it. I want to reel it back a little bit just to kind of like explain Syphus in general is people are, I've read in here and I've heard it before, people are motivated more by being pulled rather than pushed.
Yeah.
And that's the dangling carrot I always say in the score. I knew all along that people would chase the score out of competition because I feel like that's like the first response. Okay, I'm driven to be competitive because that's just human nature.
Yeah.
At least the people that are here that are driven by competition. But then you have to have that certain switch, that mentality of the form first mentality, because I feel someone in my situation who's been doing it long enough, the score doesn't motivate you anymore. That goes away. The people next to you, whether or not you're trying to stay ahead of them or just keep up with them, that eventually kind of gets stale too. You need to find something else that's bigger that you're chasing.
Yeah.
And for me, the only thing that's there still is that form first. It seems almost altruistic, whether it's to yourself or to the other people, and you're trying to set an example. And for me, that's like the only thing left. And it's like showing people like the way to do it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and that's almost like when you look at like layers of achievement within like the Syphus model, that's almost like at the top, right? Like you've worked through all these other like these barriers or these layers of like what's considered like more superficial accomplishment, like whether it's, you know, that score for the day, or whether that's even getting through it at all, or whatever. Like you've worked through those more superficial layers, and you're able to kind of come to that. It's almost like a self-actualization piece where it's like, you know, there's something much greater to this that I'm just going to pull it back, and I'm really going to hone in on this, and it's a bigger experience for me than just.
But you don't want to, I mean, I know you don't mean superficial, like literally, but it's like,
right.
But we want you to keep chasing the score or whatever it is, or stay neck and neck with the person that you're close to, because that's still motivating you. We want you to maintain motivation until you lose it, however it is that you lose it. There are people here that are still 5 years into it that are still motivated by, so-and-so's catching up to me, I got to stay ahead of them.
Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, if you're still here and you're working out and you're improving your fitness level, that's great, you know?
Oh yeah, and that's huge. And I think my framing of superficial is more like surface visible. So, but yeah, I mean, it's, well, and again, we touched on this before, where one of the really cool things about this format is there are so many layers of engagement to it that, you know, once you kind of check certain boxes, you can really dig in even deeper.
Going back to the framing in which you explain something, whether it's I can't do this or don't do this, as opposed to try this. At least when I owned all the locations and when I was kind of grooming each pro or each trainer to effectively communicate how to do form correctly, I would either have people pose it as a question, like we never want to accuse somebody of, you know, you're not on this rep, you skip 5 reps.
Yeah.
You know, we want to be like, how many times did you do this? And we can help them kind of realize that maybe they did something out of order. But I find that I am almost always spinning the way that I explain something to somebody. So for instance, like the Sypher, that when I write that, I've written it probably 10 different ways. And as a writer, I used to write for like the news, and somebody who's really close to me was an editor for a large syndication. And he always taught me that never use don't.
Yeah.
Because it's negative. So just flip it around the opposite, say, you know, instead of saying, unfortunately, I was reading the Sypher today. It said, don't drop your plate from like waist height.
Yeah.
I want to say set your plate down gently, but sometimes it doesn't have the effect of like, thou shalt not, you know?
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? It's like some things you got to say don't, or else people are just going to do the incorrect thing, if that makes sense.
No, I get that. It almost, it has kind of a more commanding tone to it.
We're not trying to freak people out. I mean, almost all of it is positive written.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm writing like a post on Facebook or something like that, I try to stay out of, don't do this. Incorrect form is that, like, that's not what I do. I use the word interpret usually.
Yeah.
If you're misinterpreting the form for this exercise, bucks, it's probably because X, Y, and Z rather than don't do this, don't do that. I try to say, you know, have this, land on your toes, stand up on your feet, make sure you try not to do it, you know, it's.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a matter of like, you know, especially when you're communicating with adults,
Yes.
you know, like here, I think it's a matter of too, like kind of an insinuating consequence. So for example, like the dropping the plate thing, right? Like dropping the plate damages the turf.
Right.
It is what it is, right? Or like, we respect the turf here. And that means like,
Yeah, that's a good.
you know, so I mean,
It's like making it sacred.
Yeah,
But that's just it. So, like, if someone drops the plate on the turf, I find myself having to explain every little bit of it so that way they're not offended. I'm just like, oh, be careful. Don't just try to set it down gently. We try to tell you on day 1 to set it down because first off, it punctures the turf. We don't want it to hurt, but then you also don't want to be rolling around and hit someone in the foot. We got to give them kind of the explanations as to why you don't drop the plate.
yeah.
It's hard for me to say like all these different ways that we kind of reframe things, but when it happens, I find myself like saying like essentially, oh, I'm priming someone to spin this in a positive way. Like people say like I'm dying or this sucks or whatever it is in the workout. A lot of times when someone says I'm dying, I'll say no, you're living. I'll say the opposite, you know, and that usually people are like, oh yeah, or I can't do this. Well, you just did it for a whole task. I can't do another halo. Well, you just did it. Just give yourself a time to recover and do it again.
Yeah.
And it's just reframing the thought.
Well, and it's really cool that you do that too, because like, especially if they're putting it out there like that, like out in the open, chances are they're probably carrying that same thought with them home, and that becomes like their negative priming over time. Because I mean, I'm guilty of that too. Like I would tell myself like I'm dying like every time I come out of here, and it's like, and I believe it. Like this workout's gonna kill me, and the next time I come in, I'm gonna die again, and you know the process will continue. So sometimes it's all about interrupting that thought.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's with something
that's good.
positive. Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, and again, like that's kind of the root of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's about interrupting that negative cognition with something completely opposite that challenges it. So the fact that you're saying like, no, you're living, or you gave it like 100% today, or you left everything on the table, or however it is that you put it. Like maybe for someone that's what they need to be like, oh yeah, you know, I did it. Like I really put everything out there today.
I think interrupting the thought is huge. So some of our very first videos, you'll see a plate that people use now, but it's completely been washed away, where I have little thoughts written on the actual plate, and I know that Shelby has them too, where it would be either things like keep going, or for me it was always like I chose this type of thing, or form first was actually that was one of the first places where I wrote form first. It was all these thoughts that came to my head while I was working out, and I would write them on a little paint pen onto the plate. So that way when I was pushing it, where else am I looking? But I'm looking at the plate, so I can break that thought. And I've always suggested that people, you know what, let's leave pens here so you can write whatever it is that you want to write on the plate. But it's never really taken off. But I thought that was a great thought, because you're always looking at the plate, and okay, let's have those things that break that mentality. I think it's
I mean, how cool would that be? Like if you just slapped a Post-it on, just like you're strong. Or you got this, or whatever it is. You know, like
this is me breathing. Like that's the thought I need. It's like like this is what I want. I think that was something like. Oh, this sucks. I can't get through this. Oh my gosh, I want to get out of this moment for a second. No, this is living. This is what it's supposed to feel like. You know, and then overcoming it is where you're going to get that really vibrant feeling of life.
Well, and sometimes you're most receptive to that when you're like broken like that. You know, like when you're exhausted and when like you're spent physically, like
vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. That creates that vulnerability. That discomfort creates that vulnerability, just like we talked about last time. And within that vulnerability, that's where your change happens. So like that can be where you're most receptive to that kind of programming. So that's pretty cool.
It's almost like people need like I don't know what it is, like a reason. Like you said, or we're talking about people being pulled. They need to find whatever that reason is, or whatever that thing is that pulls them, that gets them out of bed every day. You know, and if you have that negative self-talk, it's hard to get out of bed every day.
Well, and that's and again, like I feel like that's where a lot of people go wrong, is that maybe some folks had that realization that they need that thing, and so they're like, well, I'll wait until that thing happens instead of creating that for themselves. And again, like sometimes it's as simple as making that your new expectation, like creating that reality for yourself by telling yourself it's going to happen. Like today's going to be awesome, or I look forward to starting my day. And you just say that to yourself every single day, 500 to 1,000 times a day. Like
it's almost like having that interruptive thought that you were saying. Like, as soon as you wake up, whatever thought you're thinking, have that positive interrupting thought.
I
like that.
I have a meaningful job. I touch people's lives. Today's going to be awesome. Like whatever it is that like you lock into to kind of create for yourself, like over time it works. And people are so resistant to it because first of all, it takes time. Like it's not just going to happen overnight or in one day, or you know, like if you try to challenge that thought and it doesn't work, they're like, well, that doesn't work, and they just move on. You know, like you got to give yourself. Because that negative thinking for you took a lot more time to condition.
That's well said, yeah.
So like, my example is like, I try to be a fairly calm person by virtue of what I do professionally, but I rage in the car. Like rage in the car. Oh my God, it's ridiculous. Like I scream and shake my fists, and you know, I flip people off. And
that's
like
funny.
I rage in the car. I don't know what it is.
I can't even picture that.
Oh, it's bad. It's so bad. So like, I have a few amazing people that are like mentors of mine that have been former supervisors and confidants of mine. And one of them was like, you know what I do is that when I see somebody that, you know, cuts me off or that creates a bad experience for me, I try to create a story for that person. Like, you know, she might be a grandma, and you know, she probably has really cute kids, and you know, he's probably like, he may have had a bad day, and you know, he doesn't know what's happening, or you know, like you create a narrative for that person and try to challenge it, and over time that works, and you kind of laugh it off.
Right.
So like, But again, like it took me a long time to get to the point where I was raging in the car because I just expected that to be a bad place for me. So
it's, again, the reactive state.
yeah.
So it's to compare it to Sypher, it's you trying to stay ahead, or you getting upset that someone's getting ahead of you because they're cutting you off.
Right.
When I don't even think this made the cut on one of our videos, but coming up with Sypher, I was really immersed in the study of Kabbalah, and one of the instances was being cut off and having road rage, and to kind of go in with your example, the other thing you can do, or I do, is give the opposite reaction to what you're really feeling.
Yeah.
So I'll use my wife as an example here, which is probably not smart. If she gets cut off or someone's tailgating her or something like that, she will do this, like look over at the person to make sure she gives them like the evil eye. So I'll be like, don't look. Whatever you do, don't look. Don't look. And she like can't fight it. She can't not look at the person.
Yeah.
Whereas I will override that thought, that reactive emotional, how dare them. I try to like say like, no, I'm not going to let their actions control me. I'm going to control myself. Form first.
But also think about priming, like what you're telling her to do. You're telling her not to look, and the
Yes.
thought is look.
Yes.
Look,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So-
That's. But how do you in the moment in that like that emotional state? How do you prime that in someone?
You're gonna look, smile at him.
Okay.
Smile at him, right?
Yeah.
Like you talked about,
Yeah.
like almost do the opposite reaction to it, right?
Yes.
And I've tried to get better about that too, like
Yeah.
wave.
Yeah.
Or whatever, like it's something that seems in the moment completely ridiculous.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And that's disarming enough where it might just change the way that you process that situation.
I feel like that's just like it kills your ego. It's like, you know what? It's who am I to get upset that you're going in front of me? You know what? It's go for it. You know what? You probably have somewhere to be. I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and it's always when you're rushing somewhere that it feels like everyone's getting in your way. And I don't know why that is, but damn. But it's just I like how you caught me on that.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that's good, because your spouses or significant others are often the ones that you're like, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah, right.
When you really, I mean, when you go to therapy, and it's always like, I talk, you know, you never want to put it on the other person. If it's like, you know, you don't do this or you don't do that, it's, I feel that I feel, it's always the I feel.
Well, and then there's that depersonalizing piece of it too, where you're not focused on like what the other person is doing to you, because again, the narrative is that nobody has control over you but you. So you're saying like, you might say like, whenever I hear you're not good enough, it makes me feel like I'm not good enough, right? So like you're taking the action out of the person and you're putting it more on like, this is how I react when I hear this. So you're not putting the person as the one that's in control.
Let's go back to priming and try to like kind of put all this together in a package. You know the adage that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I feel like that has some kind of context here. You can positively influence somebody by giving them a different way to visualize whatever it is the behavior you want to get out of them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really important part of what you do, because I think the decision has to be made by the person, and like the best thing you can do or the pro can do is to just present the information, so like make them better informed to make that decision. And again, like just going back to the priming piece, you know, to either focus on like a negative behavior or the absence of the behavior, or to put a positive behavior in future tense is useless. So like if you want to change a behavior, that language has to be like, I have great form. I give everything I have on the turf every day. I perform at the highest level. You know, like that needs to be the conversation, other than like, you know, and the pro can steer that conversation by setting precedent for how that's framed. So
Like you're doing great. Like,
yeah.
like there's also, you said the pretense, but isn't there also like the act of doing too?
There is. And so it's funny how much of this goes back to like parenting 101, like that kind of generic cheerleading language, like that, you got this, you're awesome, you're rocking it up,
Right.
like, great job, like, but what? Like, what do you mean? Like, let's,
Yeah.
you know, so like, it has to be more specific than that.
And that's where I say I'm not a cheerleader. There's
Yeah.
only so many ways I can say, good job, you're almost
Yeah,
there.
it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to say it because I've said it so many times.
Yeah.
Whereas if I notice form, that's the best thing I can compliment somebody. I'm like, you have really good extension on those cyclones.
Perfect.
That is about as far as I can go. Like if someone's like really close, I'll be like, you're almost there. You're 6 feet away.
Right.
You know? But again, that's focusing on where you're going to. I'm trying to pull that out of you rather than saying, you've done good so far. I don't know what it is. You know what I mean? It's not, we're not looking backwards. We're looking forward to the next task. And a lot of times, that's what pulls people quicker. Like today there was, not bandit, but there was an exercise where I was like, I can catch my breath on coalition every single time.
Yeah.
Well, there's a rest task coming up ahead. I can power through this because I know coming ahead I've got that rest.
Right.
So the future is pulling you, and if it's not pulling you, that's not a good thought. If there's the hurdle is too great ahead, that can be repelling, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think the next level to that is, and it means everything to say that like there has to be something like future oriented to motivate you. I think that's valid, but you know the nature of priming suggests that, you know, there has to be something in the present that pulls you too. Like it's not just, you can't rely exclusively on that future, especially if you're trying to change a behavior, right? So let's say that task prior to that rest task that you have is one that you constantly struggle on, and you kind of condition yourself to believe like, well, every time I have, you know, Hackett's or whatever, I suck at it every time, and this is like, this is the worst for me, and I'm gonna, this, you know, like if that's what you've built up for yourself, that's not gonna change if you have that rest task to look forward to necessarily.
Okay, so you need to find,
you go into that, like you need to find something that pulls you
in the Hackett task or whatever it is.
right. You know, you have to change that thought to, I perform this well every time.
But sometimes I feel like sometimes we're too smart. We're smart enough to know when we're bullshitting ourselves.
But I think that's one of the pitfalls, is that you're not. You're not, because again, like it's about like where that thought lies. So when it's in your conscious thought, then it sounds like total bullshit, right? Like, who am I kidding? Like, I have to stop 3 times every time I do this task. It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But again, like, in theory, with patience, like, the idea is that you start, like, just cramming that thought more into your sub and unconscious thinking, and which is where most of your behavior is driven. Like, 90% of your behavior is driven in that sub and unconscious. So if you condition yourself enough in that way, not to say that actually doing the task and somatically conditioning doesn't help, because it does. Okay. But the thought will contribute to that.
Okay.
As much as it seems ridiculous in the moment. Again, like go back to that thought where I'm like, the example on that form was, I shed pounds daily for no reason. I mean, come on, like that, it just sounds ridiculous, right? But this guy who's been in the field forever swears by this idea that if you tell yourself that again 500 to 1,000 times a day for 3 months, your behavior will adapt to the thought.
Well, it's funny because I kind of am that way. Like I've told people that for years that if I did nothing, I would lose weight. I have to work hard to put the weight on.
Yeah.
But the bullshit factor. This is the thinking that I need to change myself. So let's say it's Hackett, just to kind of stay with that.
Yeah.
We know we've got Hackett. This is weird saying my name, but the task Hackett is really, really tough for me. But I feel like I'm BSing myself to say that, like, you're great at this, you're really, really good. Instead, I have to change my mentality to be like, this is the pain that you need in order to become good at it. Is that priming or is that reframing?
It is not.
Okay.
Because so what you're describing is future oriented.
Okay.
This is what I need to become.
Okay.
Right? So again, like if you're sticking with that priming theory, that somatic priming theory, future oriented behavior is useless.
Okay.
Right? Because again, you're building in. So like if I say to myself, like, I need $1 million to buy this Lamborghini Aventador that I really want,
Okay.
right? That doesn't say that I'm capable of it.
Okay.
Right? Like, I know what I need to get this. I'm a social worker, therefore I know I will never get that $1 million. I need to get this thing that I want, right? So like you still have that possibility of not achieving that behavior.
Okay, so with that, you're saying this is what I want, and in order to get it, these are the steps I need to carry out, but
Yeah.
I'm not carrying out this step right here.
Right.
I get that now.
Yeah. So like there's the possibility for failure in there.
Okay.
So you're still working in the possibility for failure. So like it needs to be present oriented and it needs to be definitive.
And
right?
actuated.
So, yeah, no matter how stupid it sounds.
Okay.
Because the mistake there is like that bullshit factor. You're assuming that the behavior is driving the thought.
Right.
Right? Like the fact that I struggle with this task means that I struggle with this task.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're seeing your thought as a consequence of the behavior.
What about how far you've come? Because that's a big thing that happens. People are like, man, you know, they're able to do like come halfway, to like halfway on the turf.
Yeah.
Can you say, is it mentally reframing? Is it positive if you're like, man, I could only do one at a time without taking a rest? Is that?
Yeah, so, well, I think that's a different concept. So I think
Is that past?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I think that positive reframe can help you kind of get in the mindset to build that priming narrative, because you're gonna be a lot more comfortable with saying like, I perform this task really well if you've got some like basis for saying like I've come really far, like
Okay.
I've accomplished a lot in the last whatever. But again, like the idea is not that you're acknowledging changes that you've already done, right?
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
working towards changes that you want still.
Okay.
So if you reflect too much on what's already happened, yes, it's motivating. Yes, it's like a positive reframe, like you said, but it's not priming in the sense that like it doesn't really affect where you're going.
And it's not still present in the moment, which is really interesting. So everything goes back to mindfulness.
Exactly.
Like being in the
Exactly.
moment.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing is that these things aren't mutually exclusive. Like it's not like priming is going to be my strategy and that's it, right? Like I'm only going to focus on priming and everything else is useless, right? So like, it's kind of a hodgepodge of all these strategies. So like you may be in a place where like you need that like buildup that comes from that positive reframe and the progress that you've made and that positive self-talk and the I got this and everything else that puts you in a state to like create that priming narrative and say, I'm really good at this task. I can nail, I nail Hackett every time I try it. I'm fast, I am strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know, man. It's just, I feel like that's where some people are just innately more confident. They have that positive self-talk. Other people don't. And it depends on what it comes down to.
But that confidence didn't come out of nowhere, right? Like,
Right. No, yes. Yeah, that's true.
That confidence is a consequence of probably similar priming behaviors.
Charisma is the same thing too. I mean, I'm sure that's closely related to confidence, but you have that track record. Okay, I've proved myself on these battlegrounds, you know?
Yeah, well, and you know, the funny thing is that, like, and we mentioned this already, but like, if that's your mindset going into situations, what happens around you or the way that you perceive things that happens fits that narrative better, right? So like, if you start your day with, Mondays suck, today's gonna be bullshit, I'm tired, you know, I'm always tired when I wake up, I'm never rested, and that's how you start your day, you're going to pick and choose things from your environment or your interactions that fit that narrative, right? Like, well, here we go, copier broke down, it's a Monday, or, you know, well, it's raining, of course it's raining, you know, so like you're going to find things that fit that narrative, right?
Yeah.
So same thing for like, if you wake up and you're like, it's a fantastic day today, I have a meaningful job, I rock out Mondays, I love my job, I love my life, whatever it is.
Yeah.
your mind, especially the more that's embedded in your subconscious, your mind is going to find things around you to support that narrative.
Do you think most people live in the positive and negative talk and there's no like middle ground? Like, I feel like sometimes we're talking about this, but maybe not everyone's thinking that, or like they're not thinking my Mondays are terrible. Is it always positive? Is it always negative? Or is there some?
So the idea is once something is in your subconscious or unconscious, it's neither positive nor negative. It just is.
Okay.
So the things that you're actively bringing to your awareness, either positive or negative, are the things that you need to work on to bring into your subconscious.
Oh, okay.
So like if you're actively aware of like persistent negative thoughts or persistent positive thoughts, then they're not necessarily embedded.
Okay.
Right? Like they're not part of your subconscious or unconscious.
Huh. So if you're aware of the positive or negative, it's not actually a part of it, is what you're saying?
It's not a part of your subconscious yet.
So when is it just is? When is it?
When it becomes like you're normal, you know, like when you're not, when it doesn't become an exception to your narrative.
Okay, so when you don't have that conflicting thought that's
Right.
the opposite of whatever it is you're feeling.
Right, because you're going to bring more awareness to things that are either negative or positive when
That makes sense.
when they're dissonant with what you expect.
Yes, so if the day's going well, you're not thinking like, oh, it's going to go bad. You're like,
Right,
you don't, because it just is going well.
Because that's what you expect.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Of course it's going.
And again, going back to comparison,
Yeah.
what are you comparing it to?
Oh.
Damn. All right.
So to that point, like things either being in your sub or unconscious or in your conscious, whether it's positive or negative. So for example, you ever meet that person who's just seems like happy all the time, happy-go-lucky, just like naturally happy, and you bring it to their attention and they seem like surprised by you saying
I don't think I would ever have the audacity to bring it to their attention,
well, I have.
Okay,
So,
all right,
like,
yeah.
I do have the audacity, and I confront people like, God, you're such a positive person, and they're like, wow, really? Thanks. You know, like it's
Yeah.
like, wow, what? Like, they're not going about their day like, gotta be positive, gotta be positive, gotta be positive. You know, like
Right.
they're not bringing awareness to it because it's part of who they are, right? And that's come over time as a consequence of like their circumstances or their priming or whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? So that becomes embedded.
Okay.
So like you bring your awareness fully to either the positive or negative side of it if it's something that's like not really aligning with your subconscious or unconscious thought.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Priming. Is there a difference between positive affirmations and priming?
Depends on how the affirmations are framed.
Okay.
So again, like
Or
if-
mantras?
Yeah, so I mean, like, if the, so positive affirmations can reinforce something that you've already adapted, right? So
Okay.
like, and you may use that to kind of sustain some positive act or positive mindset or whatever over
Okay.
time. If, especially, and it fits into this priming narrative, especially if it's like definitive in the here and now, present focus.
So maintaining this, like a good status
Yeah.
quo.
Yeah, especially if it's like, I'm strong, I'm capable, I'm a smart person, I do great things, you know, like whatever it is, like if that's part of your like positive affirmation, especially if you start your day, if that's like a part of your routine, then yeah, that's both priming and affirming, right? Because ideally, all priming is affirming.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the idea. It's priming when it affects change in behavior. So like if you get to a point where like that behavior is your norm and you're maintaining it with
Well, who wants to change their behavior to negative? I mean, I would hope not.
oh no, but yeah.
That's
So-
what I'm saying.
Right. So like if the change is made
Yeah.
and you know it's a part of your, it's not necessarily like in your awareness all the time, but maybe it's something you want to keep in your awareness just for like self-acknowledgement's sake, then it might remain a part of your affirmation if it's that's like in your routine.
That's just, I mean, that's interesting to me. I mean, you said priming is always affirming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's always positive because I mean, who really wants to do? Who wants pain over pleasure?
Well, so like conscious priming is always positive, you know, because like I said, that negative self-talk can, or it does prime, but that's not, and that may not be something that we're actively working on.
Right.
But that's also how we get that negative self-talk. So that is also a consequence of priming, but like if we bring our awareness to it, want to change the behavior, then that's affirming. Always.
Awareness is really kind of where it births change.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, why am I talking so negatively about myself? I need to change this. Well, how do I change it? And then go through the steps.
Exactly, yeah. So priming can have both positive and negative consequences. It's just a matter of how much awareness you're bringing to it and what your goals are.
And as a therapist or a trainer or coach or whatever, I don't want to say it's your duty, but you can be a more effective therapist if you're able to prime in these positive contexts. Right?
Yeah, because I think priming requires like very special conditions for folks. Like you have to be in a certain frame of mind to like be receptive to that.
Yeah. And
what you're describing, like, you know, positive reframing, affirming.
You have to be in a certain frame of mind to really kind of be receptive of how to prime someone.
Yeah, because it's not easy to do, right? And it's kind of one of those things where you need all the help you can get, right?
Right.
So like, you may be encouraged by what the pro has to say or what your friend has to say or how your day went. Because it's tough just to sit there and, you know, say something that sounds ridiculous to yourself 500 to 1,000 times a day to try to create change.
Right.
So the more support you get, the more successful you're probably going to be.
Well, I like how, I mean, you called me out on priming, but that's because you were kind of looking out for it. And I mean, that's kind of your job. But no, it's interesting when you can kind of apply whatever it is that, well, first off, we're discussing and actually pull something out like tangible that's an example.
Yeah.
If there is, I guess, one piece of advice or like recommendation that you could give somebody who's maybe watching this, how to positively reframe or prime themselves, what would you suggest?
I would just say give yourself a chance, you know, because I'm glad that you kind of pushed back the way you did, because I think that's common. The
bullshitting?
Yeah,
okay,
right. Yeah. Like, well, how is that going to make any sense? This is bullshit. I know this isn't the case because that's not how it works right now. But you know, the science behind this and the research behind this tells us that it works, right? Not to say that any of these other things that you're doing in your life doesn't support that, because it does. But I would just tell people to give it a chance. You know, like in your car ride, you know, to work, or, you know, when you have your morning routine, when you're brushing your teeth, you don't have to think about brushing your teeth. You don't have to think about putting underclothes. Most people, you may think about brushing your teeth. You know, take those chances and find something that like, that you really want for yourself. Create it, you know, frame it in that present, you know, that present directive language. So like, I am strong, I'm successful at work, I make healthy choices for myself. Whatever it is that you want to focus on, and just commit to it. Like do it, you know, say it to yourself as much as you can through a day, give it a few months, and just make it part of your routine and see what happens.
Is there
like coming on the turf, like, you know, we've talked so much about the first few times that you come on here. It's brutal,
right,
for a lot of folks, right? Like it's humbling, it's vulnerable. We talked about that vulnerability piece, you know, at length, and all of that's super important. The same thing is, you know, true for something as simple as priming. Like it's not simple. You know, it feels awkward, it feels silly, it feels ridiculous, it feels like you're not going to get anywhere. But down the road, that score goes up, and down the road, you get better at what you're doing. And your mind is such a powerful thing. Like it's far more, like it has far more capacity than your body does.
Well, like I think in a way, or I know in a way, what I've tried to do with Sypher is to not let your brain take over so much.
Yeah.
Too often people, when they're coming to exercise, they don't reach their goals because they're thinking about it too much. Let's distract you. I've said this before. Let's distract you. Let's just play the game, and it'll take care of itself. And then eventually you're going to see these physical results that you're maybe obsessing over prior to actually coming on the turf.
Well, and I think a lot of that can be true for like even the concept of priming. Like we default to wanting to just over-rationalize or over-analyze things. You know, we want to look at that workout and say, oh, that sucked, and I can't do this right, and if only I blah, blah, you know, like you can take it 1,000 different directions, but if you bring it back to that conditioning of, I excel at this task,
right.
I do this right, I give everything I have in every workout. Like if you pick one or two of those items and just stick with it over time, it doesn't sound complicated. It doesn't sound like it's not as, you feel like you're capable mentally of more than what you're trying to condition yourself to believe. Like you're smarter than what you're trying to tell yourself, right?
Right.
That's not the point, because you're not. Like you're trying to process things with your front brain, with your conscious awareness.
Right.
When your subconscious is the one with all the power.
Like that.
Yeah.
So let's say you are coming into your second phase of Syphus here at Sinclair Shores. You had 50 pounds to lose. I don't know where you are on your
I've got 30 knocked out.
so let's say you got another 20 to go. To stay present with where you are and to achieve this, you can't really think about this. You need to say like, I'm scoring all right. That keeps you present. I am doing this task all right. I am maintaining form first. So that keeps you in the moment, day to day, because you can say like, well, I'm maintaining the score, maintaining the average. So you're not really thinking about the end result. You have to be present.
Right, but I can still, I can take those thoughts and still expect change, right? Like, it's not about me conditioning satisfaction with my current circumstance, because I do want to get better.
Okay.
Right, so like
Yeah.
my priming for myself is, I am fast. I excel at this workout. Syphus makes me strong.
Okay.
Like I am strong.
Okay.
Like, and the cool thing about that kind of priming is that I can reframe that based on my context. Like any snapshot, any moment in time, I can reflect back on that priming and justify it. Like I am strong now because of, my score is higher than it was, and I'm able to do more than I was before. But 3 months down the road, when inevitably my score goes up and maybe
Right.
I've lost some more weight and I've gotten even better at the tasks that I do, like I can still say I'm strong because I've got this score now and I can do these tasks. So the same holds true.
Okay.
But it doesn't breed complacency.
All right, so final word on priming. Is there
Yeah.
one last thing you kind of want to shout out there?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the goal is for this to kind of bring together a lot of the other concepts that we've talked about in these discussions where I think my biggest point here was not to allow your behavior to dictate your thoughts, but to let your thoughts dictate your behavior. And it's easy to kind of fall into the trap of, especially when you're on the turf and you're performing at whatever level, letting that determine how you think about what you're doing, to really flip the script on that and start thinking about like telling yourself that you are capable, that you're strong, that you're fast, that you're successful, whatever, however it is that means the most to you, and really conditioning that thought, really just implanting it in your subconscious and seeing how that then can kind of produce that behavior that you're looking for.
So have a positive interrupting thought.
Right.